We spend so much time, focusing on these big global players. But today, I think it'd be fun to kind of like take a detour and really delve into a place that might not always be, front of mind for a lot of folks.
Yeah,
And that is Greenland, the world's largest island,
it is.
geographically a part of North America, yet it has these, really strong political ties to Europe through Denmark.
Yeah, and I think, it's so interesting is how this like seemingly remote Arctic territory has suddenly become such a focal point for all these, major world powers, right? So
Yeah.
it definitely sparks the question, why this sudden surge of interest?
Absolutely. And it all kind of seemed to gain momentum, I think, with these reports of a former U.S. president expressing a rather direct interest in acquiring Greenland,
Yeah.
even mentioning the possibility of using force. It certainly got people talking. So that's really what we're tackling in this deep dive. What has
Ah,
made this once, overlooked island so strategically and economically important that it's now drawing the attention of, the world's biggest players?
yeah. And, if we connect this to just the broader picture, right?
Yeah.
This is about way more than just a potential real estate deal.
Hmm.
We're looking at these like evolving global power dynamics and the unfolding future of the Arctic, which is so, so interesting.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, our exploration begins with Greenland's absolutely, pivotal geographical location and its, crucial implications for national security. Think about it. It's situated right between the US, Canada, the EU, and Russia. And here's a really key point. It lies on the shortest flight path between European Russia and the United States.
Totally. And I think, that geographical position has such a long history of strategic significance. And I think what really stands out is the establishment of Pacific Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base. The U.S. built this way back during the Cold War, right, with Denmark's agreement as a vital outpost to detect Soviet missile launches. And to this day, it remains the northernmost U.S. military base, which I think is fascinating.
And that strategic value hasn't just held steady. You could argue it's actually increasing in today's kind of geopolitical landscape.
Okay, so yeah.
And I think here we really need to talk about the GI-UK gap. So that's Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. And it's a crucial naval choke point. It's absolutely vital for NATO to monitor Russian submarine movements between the Arctic and the Atlantic. So building on that historical strategic importance of Greenland, for missile detection, its location also plays this crucial role in naval power dynamics, particularly concerning the GI-UK gap.
Absolutely. So this kind of raises the question, what's driving this kind of renewed U.S. interest? And we're observing increasing activity from both Russia and China in the Arctic. And that's certainly a factor prompting the U.S. to kind of like reassess its strategic position in the region.
So what's Denmark's role in all of this? Well, they currently oversee Greenland's security, but their actual military presence is relatively modest. We're talking like dog-sled patrols and a few Navy vessels. And it's really American military power that serves as the primary security guarantor there, thanks to that 1951 defense treaty. So given Denmark's, limited military capacity, how realistic is their ability to truly control the security situation in Greenland if a major power, let's say, were to exert pressure?
Yeah, and I think the dynamic between the U.S. and Denmark has definitely become a source of tension. The U.S. expressing this desire for greater control, even hinting at the possibility of military force, has definitely caused unease in Denmark and amongst its European allies. They view it as, a potential challenge to their unity and a departure from these like established alliances, right? It makes you think, what does alliance truly signify in this evolving context?
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the emerging economic opportunities in Greenland. We saw that U.S. Senate committee hearing in February 2025, and it highlighted interests that extend, far beyond just defense, particularly from the U.S. mining industry.
Yeah, and I think what's, captivating here is the sheer potential of Greenland's mineral resources, right?
Hmm.
The geological surveys indicate that vast portions of the island hold just immense reserves of minerals,
Wow.
precious metals, base metals, industrial rocks, and those all-important rare earth elements, which are so crucial for technologies like smartphones, electric car batteries, and wind turbines. The map provided by the Greenlandic government really underscores this like extensive untapped wealth.
Yeah, but it's really important to keep a balanced perspective here. So while the
Mhm.
potential is enormous, the current reality is that there's very little actual mining taking place in Greenland right now.
Right.
We're talking like only 2 active mines and around 100 people employed in the sector. And the challenges are huge, right? High extraction costs, a near complete lack of roads connecting settlements, that incredibly rugged terrain with fjords, glaciers, and of course, the severe Arctic climate. So while the mineral potential is huge, are there any, significant environmental regulations in Greenland that might hinder large-scale mining? And how might that impact the economic outlook?
Right. And I think, if we connect this to the changing climate, we start to see how these new economic possibilities are emerging, right? The melting ice is improving accessibility to those interior natural resources. And then there's the growing prospect of new Arctic shipping routes opening up. So the Northwest Passage, the Northern Sea Route, and even the Transpolar Sea Route. These routes could dramatically reduce shipping times between Asia and Europe. It's
Yeah.
pretty wild to think about.
Yeah, it's still very early days for those shipping routes, though.
Right.
They currently require these expensive icebreakers, so large-scale mining and shipping remain, largely a future prospect. Right now, Greenland's economy is really heavily reliant on fishing, and those really substantial annual grants from Denmark, we're talking around 500 million euros, which is half of Greenland's budget, and nearly 10,000 euros per resident. So it's absolutely vital for their economic and social stability.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to think about Denmark's perspective on these grants. While it represents, a significant financial commitment, their association with Greenland gives them this, pretty considerable political leverage and international standing. It allows a relatively small nation to really punch above its weight on the global stage, so that's fascinating. So is it a mutually beneficial relationship, or is there a sense of resentment on either side regarding this financial dependency?
Okay, now let's really get into the heart of this story. The historical and political relationship between Greenland and Denmark and the Greenlandic people's growing aspirations for self-determination. We simply can't understand the current dynamics without, looking at the past.
Absolutely, and I think what's essential to remember is the long history of Inuit habitation on the island, their traditional way of life, so deeply intertwined with the land and the sea. Then in 1721, modern Danish colonization began, and over the following, couple of centuries, we witnessed this imposition of Christianity and the Danish language, which led to, pretty significant cultural disruption and lasting trauma for the Inuit population.
And it wasn't until after World War II that this, gradual process of decolonization really began. Step by step, Greenland gained increasing autonomy, ultimately becoming a semi-autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, with its own elected parliament and government managing domestic affairs.
Right. But Denmark still retains responsibility for key areas like security and foreign policy. But it's so crucial to emphasize that Greenland possesses the right to declare full independence through a referendum.
Right.
And as it stands, the goal of the Greenlandic government is to achieve that independence.
Yeah.
And polls suggest that there's a majority of the population in favor, which is fascinating.
And we even heard directly from a Greenlander who voiced that, strong desire for freedom and a distinct cultural identity, saying, we are our own people, not Danes. And when the idea of being acquired by the U.S. comes up, there seems to be, pretty widespread opposition. The fundamental desire is to preserve their own land, their unique culture, and their traditional way of life.
Totally. And having said that, there is this openness to collaboration with the U.S. and other international partners, particularly in the realm of economic development.
Right.
Greenland recognizes that building a robust and sustainable economy is the biggest hurdle they face on their path to full independence, which I think makes a lot of sense. This is why they're actively pursuing partnerships and signing cooperation agreements with the U.S., the EU, and maintaining representation in these, key global centers.
So that increased attention from the U.S., particularly highlighted by the former president's interest, really does present this unique moment for Greenland, a once-in-a-generation opportunity, some might say, to openly discuss and actively shape its future. And the way the situation unfolds will have, significant international repercussions, not just for U.S. allies, but also within the broader context of these evolving global power dynamics and the potential reemergence of spheres of influence.
Absolutely. So to kind of sum up everything we've talked about today, Greenland's newfound significance is propelled by this convergence of all these interconnected factors. Its strategically vital location in a rapidly transforming Arctic, the vast potential of its mineral resources becoming increasingly accessible due to a warming climate. And underlying all of this are the aspirations of the Greenlandic people for self-determination, all set against this backdrop of a complex historical relationship with Denmark and escalating interest from all these major global powers. It's a fascinating situation.
What might have initially appeared to be a straightforward question of land acquisition turns out to be this is a Russian word, meaning multifaceted issue involving national security, economic potential, environmental considerations, historical grievances, and the fundamental right of a people to chart their own course.
Totally. So this leads to, a final thought-provoking question for all our listeners. As the Arctic landscape continues its dramatic transformation, both geographically and politically, what specific role will small nations like Greenland ultimately play in the unfolding global order? And how will the competing interests of major world powers ultimately shape their destiny in the long run? It really encourages you to think about the long-term implications of these developments and perhaps explore further the rich history and vibrant culture of Greenland.
I think that's a perfect place to leave it.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
of course.
and we'll see you next time.
See ya.